Hello, this is Bob Tauber here along with
Louise Jansen.
And we're going to be showing you some material via computer PowerPoint today. This is our 8th week of online psychopathology. So far this week we've covered delirium and dementias, and for the next section of this class we want to cover some material that involves substance abuse disorders. What we're going to be showing you is something called SAMM. I have a little bit of a pointer here, SAMM up here, SAMM, which stands for Substance Abuse Management Module. This is a program that I worked on when I worked for UCLA. So there's me, Bob Tauber, UCLA PAL Project. And we'll put some of this up on Sakai for you. Let's see. When you're at Antioch, you're going to have a class in substance use disorders. So you're going to have a whole, at least a weekend class in this. So a lot of the diagnostic categories you're going to learn all about. For example, you're going to learn the difference between substance intoxication syndromes and substance withdrawal syndromes. And you're going to learn about things called substance-induced disorders. For example, methamphetamine-induced psychotic disorder. There are substance-induced anxiety disorders, even as one as common as caffeine-induced anxiety disorder. So there's substance-induced disorders, but then there's substance use disorders, and those are the ones that I think the general public thinks about mostly when they think about substance use disorders. Or the common terms they use is somebody is an addict or somebody is a drunk for alcohol. But we in psychopathology, we have a little bit more specific names for the substance use disorders. The two biggest, and you should have read about this in your textbook and also in the DSM. Let me put a slide up here. Oh boy, I hope that could be read on this size. But on one side, we have substance abuse, and on the other side is dependence, substance dependence. When I ask classes which one of those two they think are more severe diagnoses, people often say abuse, just because perhaps it's because it's the way it sounds. But it turns out that dependence is actually a more severe diagnosis than substance abuse. So let's just quickly go over the criteria here, or some of the description. Substance abuse over here is a recurrent use of the substance despite poor work performance, recurrent use in hazardous situations, for example, while driving, recurrent use despite operating machinery or having legal problems, continued use despite persistent reoccurrent social or interpersonal problems. So that's abuse. Now, what differentiates abuse from dependence? Dependence is abuse in that using the substance messes up your life, causes harm in your life. But dependence also involves physical addiction in that you build up a tolerance to the substance, and when you no longer have access to the substance, you have a withdrawal syndrome. So dependence is the abuse criteria plus tolerance. Increased amounts of the substance are used to achieve the same desired effect, and you get a diminished effect with the same amount. And withdrawal, the substance is taken to avoid a withdrawal symptom. Lots of time is spent in order to recover from the effects of the dependence. Okay, so these are the two main categories, and in the DSM they have different codes, and there's different codes for different substances. There's alcohol abuse and alcohol dependence, and they have different codes. There's methamphetamine abuse and methamphetamine dependence, and they have different codes. Cocaine abuse and dependence, marijuana abuse, I think marijuana dependence. There's nicotine abuse and nicotine dependence. So anyhow, given these two criteria, the standard intervention that I think and we experience that's accepted in our culture for sure, and by the court systems if they order treatment, it almost always involves participating in a 12-step program. There are 12-step programs in the recovery community for being overweight, for various narcotics, 12-step programs for different kinds of personal relationships. But the classic is Alcoholics Anonymous. And so what happens is that I think Louise and I both believe that Alcoholics Anonymous is really a blessing, for this community and this world, considering the fact that there are meetings everywhere, all the time, many a day, and they don't cost anything. You could be on a cruise ship, and there are AA meetings on a cruise ship. So it's really a remarkable program in helping people recover sobriety and get away from the effects of the terrible bottoming out from the alcohol abuse and dependence. But since our population involves people who also have serious mental illnesses like schizophrenia, have come into some real problems with having our clients go to AA. So although you'll be covering this in your other class, just really briefly here, I want to get to a slide here that shows you the 12 steps of AA. It's just up here a little bit, just one sec. Okay. Again, something that may be hard to read on your screen here, but the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous is about admitting to being powerless over alcohol and having life become unmanageable, coming to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, making a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand Him, make a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, admitted to God, ourselves, and another human being the exact nature of our wrongs, and developed a readiness to remove all of these defects of character, and asking for help in removing those defects and making amends to folks that have been harmed. So again, you're going to have a class that really goes into these 12 steps in detail. But some of the folks who have more serious mental illnesses really struggle with these steps for many reasons. Louise, I've been talked a lot. What do you think are some of the reasons?
And like you said, we cover this specifically with this population and community mental health, but it's probably applicable to a lot of populations that don't quite fit in to this really good program. And then the problem is, if you don't fit in, then what is your alternative? But some of the more blatant things are sometimes people who are symptomatic and may have some peculiar behaviors just simply don't fit in and simply can't sort of manage sitting in a meeting where you have to be quiet, and their behavior or their attention span or their anxiety levels are so high that it's just not really an alternative.
That's true. We've had many of our clients that have been referred to AA meetings who were asked to leave because of their anxiety level made it difficult to stay during the whole meeting, or they might have made sounds or noises or comments that just didn't fit.
And if somebody is having symptoms like paranoia, it's hard to have people maybe think that those symptoms are pertaining particularly to them, and they may be anxious, or they may feel confronted, and it might not be a confrontation level that they can manage, so they're quickly out of there. Mostly they will just sort of stay away. And there are some times when they actually get kicked out of these meetings, and people don't mean to do that, but they do sometimes kick people with peculiar behaviors out of these meetings. They've been given messages sometimes about their medications, and this doesn't happen now as much as it did, say, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that substances are bad. So that sort of carries over to medication. So mentally ill people have gotten the message that any substance is bad, and maybe they should go off their medications. And that used to happen very frequently, but probably doesn't happen as much now, but there still is a danger of that.
Right. So those are good points. The problem is that when we look at our population, when I say our, Louise and my population, we see substance-related problems in probably 40 to 50% of our clients.
Right.
It's a serious problem, and somehow the 12-step model just didn't seem to be working. And so there was motivation for us to try to come up with some other model that we could try that maybe would work better with our clientele, or at least it would be an option, or maybe it could work with 12-step programs.
Plus, it's important to make the distinction, as is the criteria, between dependence and addiction.
Yeah, so let me get into that, back to this. So back to this criteria of abuse versus dependence. Dependence, you're physically addicted and physically have built up tolerance and have withdrawal to the substance. I think we agree that for somebody who is alcohol dependent or dependent on other substances, abstinence, abstaining, is really the only path, the only way to go. Certainly was for me when I was smoking a lot of cigarettes. I couldn't even take one puff of a cigarette. So for dependence, abstinence, and in people who do well in AA are people who tend to have dependence, substance dependence. It turns out that population of people who are more seriously mentally ill have a much higher frequency of abuse rather than dependence. It seems odd, but what seems to happen is that they don't have often the resources financially and the resources in order to score various substances to get to the point where they've built up a physical dependency. But they do for sure use, and the use of the substances causes a lot of harm in their lives. It makes it very difficult for them to work. Some of the work support programs through Department of Voc Rehab won't even work with people if they're using substances at all. That's a real problem. It also there are many housing places where folks with serious mental illness live, and there's a zero tolerance policy towards any use, and so there's lots of harm for people with serious mental illness.
And certainly can be a very big problem that they're using substances when they're also on psychiatric medication, and that's a real problem. It may not mean addiction.
That's right.
But it definitely is an abuse problem that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah. So for the sake of us introducing you what we're about to show you in the second part of this tape, is that we are saying that 12-step programs for people who have a moderate amount of psychopathology, I guess I'd say mild to moderate amount of psychopathology, and have substance dependence, it seems to be the community standard of practice, probably the best way to go. But for clients who have a high degree of psychopathology, diagnoses of schizophrenia and serious bipolar disorder, and also who more meet the criteria for abuse, we believe that there needs to be another model. And the other model you will hear about, and we want to show you a little more specifically, is a model called harm reduction. Harm reduction is a way of reducing the harm the substance abuse causes. Again, dependence, addiction, 12-step programs, abstinence is the goal. Serious mental illness, abuse, harm reduction, reducing the harm that the use causes, with the long-term goal of abstinence, but a willingness to work with people who may not be motivated to participate in a full abstinence program. So we're going to be talking in the next segment here on harm reduction and a specific harm reduction model.